All of these texts and videos are about Indigenous people fighting for their rights. So, yes, for centuries, Indigenous people have been oppressed in many different ways, and they continue having to fight to protect their land, culture, and their way of life. So, yeah, they have faced discrimination since colonization and probably before that, including loss of territory and threats to their culture and traditions. So, but Indigenous movements are very strong today, and they use strategies such as political action, education, and protests to demand justice and stand up for their rights. So, this refers to Sarah Hoon's writing, which is includes the struggle of the Kurds in Turkey and the Zapatistas in Mexico. So they're fighting for their self-determination and for their rights to be recognized. So yeah, both of these fights are compared in Sarah Hoon's work, and they emphasize how they both use global ideas to strengthen their fights and to stand up for themselves. And the Kurds, which are a group in the Middle East, have long tried to get autonomy in Turkey, and they often face government oppression. The government doesn't want them to be their own people, to have their own beliefs and values. And this is similar to the Zapatistas in southern Mexico, and who have an indigenous movement, and they want to have indigenous governance, and they're resisting the government of Mexico. So they're both using human rights messages and anti-globalization messages to gain attention and support internationally for their causes. So also Semper Tegui, writes about the indigenous people in Latin America who are fighting to protect the environment. So involved in this are the indigenous women in Ecuador who are activists to resist extractivist industries such as oil drilling and mining, because these industries destroy forests and pollute rivers and displace communities, and also threaten the survival of these indigenous communities. So these women are not only defending nature, but they're defending their way of life. So they connect with global ecofeminist movements, and then those movements link the exploitation of the environment to the oppression of women. So they're using that those feminist movements to support and strengthen their own. So their fight is different from the ecofeminist movements because it's tied to indigenous traditions and their own community-based leadership, which is a little bit different from the ecofeminist movement. So they're using all of their resources in order to fight for themselves. Howard also discusses how Evo Morales, even though he's not the best president in every single way, he has introduced reforms to make the education system more inclusive. So he's pushing for schools to teach indigenous languages, history, and knowledge. And this is hopefully going to undo some of the negative effects and erasive effects of colonialism. But yeah, this wasn't a perfect system because these changes faced obstacles even with government-backed support. Schools lacked resources, and there was resistance from the traditional educational institutions. So even when indigenous people gain political power, like Evo Morales, making real change is very difficult because of the ways that they have been viewed in the past. So even though Evo's making a great effort, it's not necessarily going to work perfectly. So the report by Davis Castro gives lots of charts and data on indigenous communities in Latin America, even if the data is skewed to be less than the truth. And this data shows, among other things, that they still face serious inequalities. Indigenous people are more likely to live in poverty and have less access to education, healthcare, and jobs. And there's still progress in these reports. More Indigenous leaders are entering politics, and more communities are able to organize and fight for their rights. So the struggles are still continuing, but Indigenous voices are becoming more seen and valued than ever before. So The Guardian describes Lupita, who's a young activist in Mexico, and she's Indigenous. She works to improve the lives of Indigenous women. She fights gender-based violence and advocates for their rights. So, she is making a huge impact despite being a woman, being young, and being Indigenous. So, she uses social media and community organization as well as legal action to bring attention to her struggles, which is very different than it's ever been in the past, as social media is becoming such a huge cornerstone of the world, and it's giving more people more voices and strength to connect and amplify their voices. So this, among many other stories, describe how Indigenous people have been trying so hard to gain their own rights and to make their voices heard, and there's been some progress, but obviously not a lot. There's many changes that need to be made, but they're doing a great job of not just surviving, but leading the fight for justice.